Welcome to Brainwaves and Breakthroughs.
Okay, so we've got a ton of listener questions and research on the link between procrastination and, well, how we view time.
Yeah, time perspective.
Right, time perspective. So let's do a deep dive into all this stuff.
Definitely. It seems like everyone struggles with this at some point.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I'll admit, I've definitely procrastinated a time or two myself.
Uh-huh.
But, I think it'd be fascinating to really get into the why. Like, what is actually going on in our brains when we do this?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, it's important to say that procrastination isn't just laziness, right?
Right.
It's a conscious choice to delay a task, even though you know there might be negative consequences down the line.
Okay. So one of the studies that a lot of you sent over, but Diaz Morales and Ferrari,
Yeah.
they linked procrastination to this thing called present fatalism,
Right.
which I got to say sounds a bit ominous.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
Well, think of it as like a feeling that the future's already set in stone.
Oh, okay.
And so there's really no point in trying to change it.
So why bother?
Yeah.
Like if it's going to happen anyway, I might as well just enjoy myself now.
So it's almost like just throwing your hands up in the air and saying, whatever happens, happens.
Exactly.
And I can definitely see how that kind of mindset would lead to putting things off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And on top of that, procrastination can also be a way to avoid those negative emotions that come with certain tasks.
Like you're dreading doing something.
Right, like a big presentation or a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
You put it off to avoid that discomfort.
So it's almost like a self-esteem protection thing, too.
Exactly. Like if I don't do it, then I can't fail at it.
Right, right.
And that protects my ego.
Yeah. And this is kind of like what that one source was talking about, describing it as this like battle between your present self,
Right.
who just wants that instant gratification,
Of course.
and your future self, who's like, no, you're going to regret this later. It's such a good way to put it because, we often think of procrastination as being all about pleasure seeking.
Yeah, the hedonistic side.
Exactly.
But a lot of times it's really about just avoiding discomfort.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what about when you're just totally stuck in this like cycle of indecision? Is that a form of procrastination too?
It absolutely is. Indecision it's like this sneaky form of procrastination where you're delaying taking any action
Right.
by just endlessly weighing your options,
Yeah. Right.
And actually, Diaz Morales and Ferrari, they found that indecision is it's often linked to ruminating on past events.
Oh.
And that can be both positive and negative events.
So instead of like focusing on what you need to do now,
Yeah.
you're kind of stuck replaying these past scenarios in your head.
Right. And it can be paralyzing.
Oh, I could totally relate to that. It's like those what if moments
Yes.
that can really keep you frozen in place.
Totally. Have you ever found yourself stuck in that cycle?
Oh, yeah. Especially with big decisions. It's like I overthink everything
Yeah.
and get so bogged down in all the potential outcomes.
Makes sense.
Okay, so we've talked about the mind, but what about the actual brain? Like what's going on in there when we procrastinate?
That's where it gets really interesting. It's like a battle between different parts of your brain, actually.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's hear about this brain battle.
All right, so picture this. You're trying to finish a report for work,
Oh.
but then a notification pops up on your phone about a new video from your favorite comedian.
This sounds familiar.
Right. And so that's your limbic system, which is the impulsive, emotional part of your brain, basically screaming at you to watch that video.
All right.
Just get that instant gratification.
So I'm guessing the prefrontal cortex is that little voice of reason telling me to get back to work.
Exactly. That's the more evolved part of your brain, the planner, the decision maker. It knows you should stay focused.
Okay.
But here's the thing. The prefrontal cortex, it's like a muscle that gets tired easily. After a long day of making decisions and resisting impulses, it just gets exhausted.
So willpower depletion.
Exactly. And when that happens, the limbic system, it often wins out, which leads to procrastination.
It's like giving in to temptation.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But so then every time we give in, doesn't that just reinforce those neural pathways for avoidance?
You got it. It's like we're actually training our brains to become master procrastinators.
Oh, great. That's not scary.
No, it's something to be aware of, right?
For sure.
Okay.
Okay, so Where does dopamine fit into all of this? I mean, I know it's all about pleasure and motivation, but how does that relate to procrastination?
Dopamine is key here because you don't even have to actually complete a task to get that dopamine hit. Just the anticipation of a reward
Oh, it
can trigger dopamine release.
So even just thinking about that funny cat video gives me a little surge of, I don't know,
Pleasure.
yeah, pleasure, anticipation, and that makes me want to go watch it even more.
Exactly. Your brain is actually rewarding you for procrastinating.
Oh, fantastic. This is just getting better and better.
But that's why it's so hard to break the cycle, right?
Yeah.
Our brains are wired to seek out those quick dopamine hits.
Even if it means putting off those bigger, more important things.
Exactly. So in a way, you're fighting your own biology.
It's like we're still hardwired for that immediate gratification, even though most of us aren't facing the same, like, survival threats as our ancestors, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Like back in the day, they had to focus on immediate survival.
Right. Predators finding food.
Exactly. Delaying gratification could have meant, missing a meal or getting eaten.
So this present bias,
Right.
it might have actually been an adaptive strategy for survival.
Yeah, think about it. Maybe putting off exploring a new, potentially dangerous territory kept them safe.
That's interesting.
Right. Or focusing on gathering food immediately rather than planning for the future meant they didn't starve.
So we've got this ancient wiring
Yeah.
that's kind of stuck with us, even though our world is very different now.
Absolutely.
And this brings us back to those procrastinators and how they view time, right?
Right. Like Diaz Morales and Ferrari, they found that people who procrastinate tend to score lower on this thing called future orientation.
Okay, so future orientation. What exactly does that mean? Are they just like not thinking about the future at all?
Not necessarily. They do think about it, but often it's through more of a negative lens.
Oh.
It's like, why bother? It won't work out anyway,
That makes sense.
Or they get overwhelmed by how big future tasks seem, so they just avoid them altogether.
Right, right. So it's not that they're completely oblivious to the future. It's more like they have a bit of a distorted view of it.
Exactly. And this negativity towards the future, plus that present bias we talked about, it creates a perfect storm for procrastination to thrive.
Right. And some of the other research you shared kind of supports this too, right? Like procrastinators often overestimate how much time they actually need for tasks.
Yes. A study by McCown and colleagues found that procrastinators tend to think tasks will take way longer than they actually do.
So they're making it seem even more daunting in their minds.
Exactly. And then another study by Lay and Burns, they found that procrastinators are much more likely to start things at the last minute.
Oh, yeah.
Which just adds to the stress and the pressure.
So it's like this combination of distorted time perception, negative feelings towards the future,
Yeah.
and then just a tendency to make things harder on themselves by waiting till the last minute.
Right. So all of these cognitive biases, plus our evolutionary wiring, can make procrastination a really tough habit to break.
Okay, so I think this is the million-dollar question now. Is there any hope for us chronic procrastinators? Like, can we actually rewire our brains and break free from this cycle?
Absolutely. There are actually several strategies that can help. One article you sent from Nest Labs, it outlines 5 techniques.
Okay, perfect. Let's get into those.
All right. So this first one, it might sound a little counterintuitive, but it's called Eat the Frog.
Eat the frog.
Okay. So the idea is to tackle your most dreaded task first thing in the morning.
Okay, so get it out of the way.
Exactly. You get that big scary thing done, and then the rest of your day feels so much lighter.
Yeah, I can see how that would be helpful.
Right. Plus, you get this sense of accomplishment early on, which can really boost your motivation for the rest of the day.
I like that.
Oh.
Okay, what about breaking those big tasks down into smaller chunks? I feel like that's something I've tried before, and it does make it feel less overwhelming.
Yes, that's another great one. It's all about creating those smaller milestones so you can actually track your progress
Right.
and stay motivated. It's much easier to get started when you're facing a small, manageable piece.
Right.
Instead of, the whole monstrous task all at once.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also love the 10-minute trick.
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic.
It's so simple, but, you set a timer for 10 minutes and just commit to working on the task for that short amount of time.
It's all about overcoming that initial inertia, right?
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how often those 10 minutes turn into 20 or 30 minutes once you actually get going.
Exactly. And sometimes I find that having like some external pressure can be helpful. So that's where the work in public strategy comes in, right?
Exactly. Tell a friend about your goal or work in a public space like a coffee shop, library, whatever,
Yeah.
you create a sense of accountability that way.
Yeah.
You know that someone else is aware of what you're trying to do, so it makes it a little harder to procrastinate.
Right. It's like having that built-in cheerleader or maybe like a watchful eye to keep you on track.
Exactly. Or both.
Ha ha ha. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about rewards? I feel like those can be super motivating too.
Absolutely. I mean, our brains love rewards, right?
Right.
So set up a little reward system for yourself. When you complete a task, indulge in something you enjoy, whether it's reading a chapter in a book, listening to a podcast.
Right. Or like a nice long bath.
Yes.
Oh.
Anything that feels rewarding.
Yeah, it's like giving yourself a little pat on the back for a job well done.
Exactly. You're actually harnessing that dopamine loop for good.
Instead of letting it control us.
Exactly.
I like it. Okay, so in addition to these strategies, you mentioned that mindfulness plays a big role in breaking this procrastination cycle.
Absolutely.
So how exactly does mindfulness come into play here?
Well, mindfulness is all about becoming aware of your thoughts and feelings and bodily sensations in the present moment,
Right.
and doing that without judgment.
Okay.
So when it comes to procrastination, mindfulness helps you notice those sneaky triggers that set you off.
So it's like catching yourself in the act of, reaching for your phone instead of starting that report.
Exactly. The more aware you become of your procrastination patterns, the more you can start to make conscious choices.
Right. So instead of automatically giving in to the urge to, check social media or whatever,
Yeah.
you can pause,
Yeah.
acknowledge the urge, and then choose a different course of action.
Exactly. It takes practice, but it's definitely possible.
That makes a lot of sense. But even with all these strategies, I feel like sometimes I still need a little extra help to stay on track.
Well, there are some time management techniques that can be really helpful on top of those strategies.
Okay. Yeah, I'm all for that. Like, what kind of techniques are we talking about?
So one that's super popular is the Pomodoro technique.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Have you tried it?
I haven't, no.
You should. It's so simple, but effective.
Okay, well, tell me how it works.
Okay, so basically, you set a timer for 25 minutes of focused work,
Okay.
followed by a 5-minute break.
Okay.
And then after 4 of those Pomodoros, you take a longer break, like 15 or 20 minutes.
So it's like built-in breaks to help you stay focused and avoid burnout.
Exactly. The short breaks let your brain rest and recharge, so you can come back to your task with renewed energy.
That's a good idea. What about time boxing? I've heard that one can be helpful too.
Yeah, time boxing is great. It's all about allocating specific time slots in your day for certain tasks.
Okay.
It's like creating a schedule for your work, but instead of focusing on what you need to get done,
Right.
you focus on when you're going to do it.
Oh, okay, I see.
So instead of saying, I need to write this report today,
Right.
you would say, I'm going to block out 2 hours from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. to work on the report.
Okay, so you're giving it that designated spot in your day instead of letting it float around in this nebulous space of sometime later.
Exactly.
And I feel like that would hold you accountable too because you've blocked off that time.
Right. You've made the commitment.
It's in the calendar.
It's there.
Yeah. Okay, so these techniques, they're not about working harder, they're about working smarter.
Exactly.
It's about understanding how your brain works and then using that knowledge to your advantage.
I think that's a great takeaway. And also, it's important to remember that we're all human. We're all going to procrastinate sometimes. It's about being kind to ourselves and not beating ourselves up when we do.
Yeah, self-compassion is so important.
Absolutely. We need to treat ourselves with the same understanding and kindness that we would offer a friend who's struggling.
Right, so instead of like shaming ourselves for procrastinating,
Yeah.
we can view it as an opportunity to learn more about ourselves and develop new skills.
Exactly. I love that. It's about shifting our mindset from one of shame and frustration to one of curiosity and self-compassion.
I like that. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
It's amazing how much there is to learn about something that seems as simple as procrastination.
Right. But it really highlights the complexity of human behavior. We've got the psychology, the neurology, even evolutionary influences.
Yeah, and the big takeaway is that while it can be a challenge, it's not an insurmountable one. There are practical strategies out there, and we can rewire our brains and develop those healthier habits.
Right. And to kind of wrap things up, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What if, instead of viewing procrastination as the enemy, we saw it as a teacher?
Yeah.
Like a guide to help us understand our own minds and motivations better.
I love that perspective. It's about shifting from like this feeling of being a failure to a feeling of, okay, this is an opportunity to learn and grow.
Exactly.
Okay, so this week,
Yes.
I challenge everyone listening.
I love it.
Choose one of the strategies we've talked about
Uh-huh.
and give it a try.
Yes.
And just observe what happens without judgment and see what you learn about yourself in the process.
I love that.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into procrastination. Hopefully you've learned some valuable insights that will help you navigate this experience with a little more awareness and self-compassion.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring. And remember, procrastination doesn't have to be a life sentence. It can be a stepping stone to greater self-understanding and personal growth. The structure of the Pomodoro technique is really helpful.
Yeah, I like that.
It's all about working with your brain's natural rhythms, not against them.
Right, giving yourself those little breaks.
Exactly.
Okay, what about time boxing? I've heard that one can be really helpful too.
Time boxing is great for people who tend to feel overwhelmed by their to-do lists.
Okay.
Because it's about shifting your focus from what you need to do to when you're going to do it.
Right, so you're not just adding things to the list.
Right.
You're actually scheduling them in.
Exactly. So, for example, instead of saying, okay, I need to write this report today, you'd say, I'm going to block out 2 hours from 10 a.m. to 12:00 p.m. to work on the report.
Ah, okay. So you're assigning it a specific time slot.
Right.
Instead of just letting it float around in that, like, sometime later zone.
Exactly. And that makes you more likely to actually stick to it. It's in the calendar.
It's there.
You can't miss it.
And you've made the commitment.
Right. Okay, so these techniques, they're not about, working harder. They're about working smarter.
Yeah.
Understanding your brain and using that to your advantage.
Which is what this whole deep dive is about.
Right. And I think it's so important to remember that we're all human. We're all going to procrastinate sometimes. It's about, being kind to ourselves and not beating ourselves up when we do slip up.
I completely agree. Self-compassion is so crucial. I mean, think about it. We would never talk to a friend the way we sometimes talk to ourselves when we procrastinate.
Oh, that's so true.
We need to offer ourselves the same understanding and kindness that we would offer to a friend who's struggling.
Right, right. So instead of, getting stuck in that shame spiral, we can view procrastination as an opportunity to, learn more about ourselves and develop new skills.
Exactly. It's about shifting our mindset from one of I'm a failure.
To, okay, this is a chance for growth, for self-discovery.
I love that. Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
it's amazing how much there is to learn about something that seems as simple as procrastination.
It really is. I mean, it just highlights the complexity of human behavior. It's not just one thing. It's, psychological factors, neurological processes, even evolutionary influences.
It's like this perfect storm.
Exactly.
And I think the big takeaway here is that while procrastination can be a huge challenge, it's not an insurmountable one.
Absolutely.
There are these practical strategies out there that we can use to, rewire our brains and develop healthier habits.
And build self-awareness.
Exactly. So as we finish up, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What if, instead of viewing procrastination as the enemy, we saw it as a teacher, a guide to help us understand our own minds and motivations better?
I love that perspective. It's about shifting that whole, that shame and blame to a place of curiosity.
Right, and self-compassion.
Right.
Okay, so for everyone listening, I challenge you this week, choose one of the strategies we've talked about.
Yeah, just one.
Give it a try and just observe what happens without judgment. See what you learn about yourself in the process.
I love that.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into procrastination. We hope you've gained some valuable insights that will help you navigate this, this very human experience with a little more awareness and self-compassion.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring. And remember, procrastination doesn't have to be a life sentence. It can be a stepping stone to greater self-understanding and personal growth.
Yeah, it can be really helpful for those of us who, tend to get distracted easily.
Right.
It forces you to stay focused for those 25 minutes.
Okay. I like it. I like it. So are these, these time management techniques that kind of go hand in hand with all those strategies we talked about earlier?
Exactly. They work together to create a system that, helps you manage your time more effectively.
So it's like a holistic approach.
Right. You're not just tackling procrastination from one angle, right? It's like a multi-pronged attack.
Exactly. You're addressing it from multiple perspectives.
I like that multi-pronged attack.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me how much there is to learn about something that seems, on the surface, as simple as just procrastinating.
Right. It's like this hidden world of, psychology and neurology and even our evolutionary past.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that procrastination, it's not, it's not a character flaw.
Right. It's not a sign of weakness.
It's something that we can, understand and work with.
Absolutely. And there are so many tools and techniques that can help.
Exactly. And I think it's so important to remember that, we're all going to procrastinate sometimes.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's about, being kind to ourselves and not getting caught up in that self-judgment when we do slip up.
I completely agree. Self-compassion is key.
So as we wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to add or any final thoughts for our listeners?
Well, I just want to emphasize that, procrastination, it's not a life sentence. Right. It's something that we can learn from and grow from.
And overcome.
Exactly. So if you're struggling with procrastination, don't beat yourself up about it. Just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Remember all the things we've talked about today.
Yeah.
And choose one strategy to focus on.
Just one.
And see how it goes. You might be surprised by what you discover about yourself in the process.
That's a great point. I love that. So to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into procrastination.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights, and remember, you're not alone in this.
We're all in this together.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning about yourselves.